My background is in French literature. And when I was a graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, I, knowing the realities of the job market, was trying to do my due diligence and prepare for both a non-academic career and also an academic career. And there weren't a lot of resources available at the time through our career center to kind of help me navigate what that would look like. So I ended up doing a lot of that work kind of on my own, networking in technology fields, out in the Austin area, things of that nature. And when I entered academia and became a visiting assistant professor and then assistant professor, I wanted to commit to making sure that both undergraduate students and the graduate students I supported didn't have to kind of go it alone and kind of figure out that process without a support network. So I started my own career consulting business kind of on the side, where I started partnering with different institutions. First, the George Washington University, that was a number of years ago, but I've been working with them every year since, really trying to help undergraduates and graduate students make tangible connections between what they're learning in the classroom and what they might do with those skills and with their experiences in industries other than education. So trying to think a little bit more broadly about the applications of their learning gains in different kinds of environments. I formally left academia in 2021 and now work in educational technology. And what's kind of neat about the role that I'm in now is that I hire early career talent and I mentor young, junior talent to kind of take the next steps in their career. So it's nice to kind of have that bridge and see that perspective both through the kind of the corporate lens and then also having that background in higher education. So to kind of frame this conversation around career readiness, I wanted to take a bit of a step back and think about career readiness needs broadly across universities, across higher ed as an industry. As I know our career services individual on the call here can probably attest to as well, there's been an increase in career services, tools, resources in general in recent years. And that's been largely in response to career readiness needs across all majors. So before we dive into language major needs, I wanted to highlight kind of what that landscape looks like from two different perspectives. From the perspective of students who are entering the job market, so who are maybe juniors, seniors, really preparing to apply for those first jobs out of college. And then also from the employer lens, where are the gaps that employers are seeing and how can we maybe fill some of those gaps, or how do these gaps inform different career services, tools, and career readiness needs at the institutional level while students are still enrolled in programs. So all of these kind of statistics, numbers, all of these things are from the last 3 years, so fairly recent. A Lucian and Wakefield research group did a poll across over 1,000 undergraduate students who were categorized as Generation Z, which is the majority of the current generation of college students. And when asked about how they felt about entering the job market, only 36% of them said that they felt prepared to enter the job market based on the program that they were in. So that's across all majors. So we have less than half of current students entering the job market feeling like they're prepared for that next step. When you look at liberal arts majors specifically, that number increases a little bit. The uncertainty increases a little bit. Only 40% said that they believe their education would lead to a good job. So that leaves, 60% of liberal arts majors who are either uncertain or they really don't think that their major is going to lead to a good job. When undergraduates, or recent graduates rather, are entering the job market, applying for that first job, Gallup Strata ran a survey about applying for those kinds of jobs and maybe why or why not students applied or didn't apply. 49% of those recent graduates didn't apply for entry-level positions, not because they weren't unqualified, but because they felt underqualified. there's kind of a gap there in students understanding what kinds of skills they've developed in programs and whether they're prepared to take that next step. And then, of course, it shouldn't come as a surprise in this economic climate that when today's students are thinking about entering the job market and kind of preparing and trying to understand what major might lead to the best job, a job that's appealing to them, about 70% of students are saying that pay or salary is at the top of their list for consideration. When we look to through the employer lens, or how students are doing when they're in their first 1 to 3 years in a job, over half of college graduates, and this is not specific to SMU. I've looked at some of your numbers and they're quite good, but across the US, over half of college graduates are underemployed a year after they graduate, or underemployed rather. So what underemployed means is it means they are either working in a position where a college degree is not required, or they are working in a part-time capacity. When we're looking at skills and the perception of skills between students and employers, employers are, or students rather, are ranking themselves 20 percentage higher than employers are for certain core skills for entry-level roles. And so the two that stand out here are communication and professionalism, where students across all majors are entering the job market, feeling like they're very, adept in these areas, and employers are reporting back that communication and professionalism are definite areas where students across all majors need to focus a little bit more. This is good news, I think, for language majors, given that communication is a core transferable skill that they bring to the job market. And then finally, when employers shared back in a survey ran by the Association for Talent Development, employers shared that for them, the biggest gaps in skills were in critical thinking, data analysis, and just the ability to apply knowledge in real-world settings, which again, at least for critical thinking and knowledge application, I know that those are some skill areas that are at the fore in many language programs. So just kind of some food for thought in terms of career readiness needs and what the landscape looks like for all majors. When we look at language majors specifically, there is not a lot of research out there on how language majors are performing on the job market, how they feel about the job market, and kind of what activities are happening leading up to entering the job market. So what I've done in the last few years is every time I give a student workshop, I send out the exact same survey questions where I'm asking them to rank their skills, what skills they think they have, and to rate their level of preparedness for the job market, or how they feel that their program is helping them develop in those ways. So these are some of the statistics that I've compiled, and I continue to update these numbers as I lead different student workshops. But so far, from the almost 700 now language majors that I've surveyed, 79% have shared back that they were uncertain which career field they would enter after graduation. And when I explain to them career fields in the survey, I say things like education, government, healthcare, just a very broad industry that they might want to pursue or target. And so the vast majority, right, haven't given that thought as they're preparing to kind of take that next step and enter the job market. And then when thinking about their top concerns, language majors have shared back that explaining what skills they have as students of languages or languages and literatures, explaining skills to employers feels like an area where they're a little bit lost, they could use some development. And then of course, not really knowing which roles that they're qualified to fill. They tend to have a lot of interest, ideas about what types of jobs are interesting to them, but understanding kind of what hiring managers are looking for, or what it means to apply for an entry-level role. Those are areas where there's a little bit of need for development. And then after student workshops, when I survey them again and ask, hey, what activities do you feel have been most beneficial to you? Are you ready? What are you going to take with you to hit the ground running as you connect with your career center, as you do some of these activities and development on your own? And they shared back that identifying and articulating the career skills that they've developed in the courses they're already in was the most valuable activity for their professionalization. So as we kind of talk a little bit here today, I'll show you what those activities and exercises look like, but just wanted to give you kind of that idea of where the language majors that I've worked with, where they kind of sit in terms of their career readiness. And just so everyone knows too, I am monitoring the chat. So if there's anything that you want to put in the chat, I'm able to see the windows here on Zoom as well. So if you want to raise a hand at any point, if you have a burning question that you want to ask, feel free to put it in the chat or just to raise a hand and come off mute. Happy to engage that way. Excellent. All right. So in this work, this career readiness work, what I saw 5+ years ago and kind of what's informed the work that I do now, I saw an opportunity vis-a-vis the work with students that I do to help them make a connection between what they're learning in the classroom and professionalization. Both just to give them confidence in what their language program is doing for them professionally, but also to instill in them a bit more career clarity and reinforce that notion that language studies do equip them with transferable skills, with practical skills, with skills that hiring managers value and need, to help them find early career success. So that's kind of the angle that I take, at least in thinking about career readiness. And so what that looks like in practice is, for me, talking with faculty about making small changes, not in the curricula, right? Not in what is being taught, but rather in what we're talking to students about in terms of what they can do with their learning, what that learning means in context beyond the classroom. So I would like to make that clear, right? I think sometimes there's a bit of hesitation when I, travel to campuses and meet with faculty that I'm going to ask them to, put aside the syllabus that they've created and kind of implement something completely different in the classroom. I'm really talking about starting small with conversations with students and then directing them to the appropriate resources, but really trying to start conversations with them to kind of shift their mindset to think in a more professional way about what they're doing in the classroom and in a program. So for us here, I've shared, I believe, or had been in the flyer that circulated, some general takeaways and topics that we'll cover. But before I kind of go through those, did want to highlight that my approach here is going to be to start with activities and efforts that are very low efforts, on the low lift side of things, but that still have an impact. I realize that, not everyone has the same kind of familiarity with career readiness conversations, career resources, professional pathways for language majors, that kind of thing. So where I'll start is very base level. What does career readiness mean? And how can we talk about career readiness in informal conversations with students to then help them to make that connection between language learning and career readiness? So that'll be the first kind of area that we'll touch. Then we'll move to more what I guess I would call medium efforts, activities and exercises, where we're trying to engage students more directly in career readiness thought and action from the classroom. So things that can be done in the classroom to help students make those kinds of connections. Then we'll move to specific career readiness activities. And these are pulled from activities that I've helped other faculty members develop, that other faculty members have brought back to me and say, hey, Ashley, you shared this idea so many years ago. I've taken a spin on this. It worked really well in my class. And so I've kind of adapted some of those activities over the years. And so I'll share some of those with you all, and we can talk a little bit about the effort and impact. And then lastly, I'll speak briefly to the career readiness services, tools, and resources that you have available through your Career Center. And I know that we have the Career Center Director, Peyton, here on the call. And so I'll probably call on her toward the end to elaborate on some of those areas, but just wanted to make everyone kind of aware of what some of those resources are, and encourage everyone to direct students to the Career Center to sort of take some of these concepts and some of the conversations that you have with your students and maybe take it a step further as they plan for their careers. All right, we will go ahead and dive in. I don't see anything in the chat, so. All right, so talking about career readiness as a definition, when I put this question in front of students, you know, kind of what career ready means to them, a lot of times they'll respond that, you know, being career ready means that my resume is ready to go, my cover letter is ready to go, and I am super hireable. That's great for preparing for the job market and kind of being ready for that first entry level role. But the way that we talk about career readiness is the foundation for demonstrating key competencies that prepare a student to succeed in the workplace. So not necessarily writing the resume, writing the cover letter, and doing that work to enter the job market. This stuff all happens before. So this is the foundational building blocks, so to speak, for being ready to enter the job market. So a lot of this focuses on competencies, on skills, of generating awareness for students of what they're doing in a language program and how that can help them professionally. So I'd like to focus on the National Association of Colleges and Employers competencies, the ones that they've defined as being essential for all majors and for all employers. They're kind of the point of reference, this organization, in terms of bridging the gap between higher education and employer needs. So they refresh their list of core competencies every, you know, so many years. But the 8 that are out currently have been pretty consistent in recent years. And these competencies are ones that they've identified as serving students in any industry and any role, for entry-level roles, I should specify. And so they're a good place for folks who are just getting started in, you know, their career readiness efforts to understand and focus on, especially from a faculty lens. Just because if you focus on these 8 skills, you're more than likely to be really doing students a favor and helping them to understand what employers are looking for. So I put those 8 up here on the screen, and as you'll notice, they're all pretty broad, right? No surprise, communication is always and will probably always be in the top list of core competencies for entry-level talent, for good reason, right? Entry-level roles are typically filled by folks who are working in team environments that are doing a lot of the work with different teams, as those entry-level employees look to find their niche, look to find their specialization, that type of thing. Communication is typically at the fore of a lot of that work. Leadership, professionalism, teamwork is up there too for a lot of those same reasons that I mentioned. Technology, not necessarily in the way that some students might think. Some students say, oh, technology, you mean like coding and very expert level application. No, technology here means navigating, you know, the Microsoft Office suite. It means being able to learn new technology platforms, applications, and just really having a mind for learning new things and adapting to different technologies. And I'm sure just at a glance, right, you can probably recognize some of these skills as being ones where you could make a connection between what students are doing in your language courses and potentially how that's going to serve them in these ways, in these areas. So what this looks like for the language programs and the language faculty that I've worked with, Again, when thinking about those lower effort ways of connecting career readiness with students and with what you're doing in the classroom, I want to share with you some ways that department chairs or program leads have taken the definition of career readiness and some of those core competencies that, again, have already been defined by a reputable, organization, and how they've made them into promotional materials, so to speak, that are tailored to a language program to help students recognize the professional value of language learning. And I'll show you some concrete examples here, but these are the three main areas where I've seen this put into practice. The first one here is adding career competencies to the department's website. I worked with an institution a couple of years ago where we took those NACE competencies and we tailored the definitions that are, again, available on the website, NACE's website, and tailored them for a language learning audience to, again, promote how that institution's language programs are, how they're developing students and the kinds of skills students are developing. Another way I've seen this work is creating career readiness one-pagers for different promotional materials to use as talking points, to share with students, to share with community networks, university leadership, just having kind of a reference point where everyone is aligned on the competencies that they believe are being developed in that particular program. And then lastly, tailoring career readiness as a definition and some of those skills, translating that into different talking points for what I call welcome talks, where a department chair or department representative visits classrooms, particularly for first semester and second semester language courses, and kind of going around to different classrooms and giving students an overview of what they can do with a language minor or major, and connecting career competencies to some of those takeaways to get students in that mindset early on that continuing to study languages at the institution is going to be something that helps them advance in their career. So planting that seed early on that, hey, you're not in this class to maybe check a box for a requirement for your other degree program, but there are very practical takeaways and ways that you can develop as a future professional by continuing to study languages. Because again, we sometimes think of those things as obvious, right? Like being multilingual is going to help you in your career. But students don't always make that connection, especially when they're in a first semester or second semester language course where they think, oh, well, I'm not going to be fluent in this language, so this won't really serve me professionally. But when we're talking about developing different kinds of transferable skills like humility and adaptability, you can really tap into those things when connecting with students in that way, so that they make that connection and they see even a 101 level French course, for example, as something that is contributing to developing as a professional, as a person. So to give you some examples of kind of what that looks like in practice. So here I've taken those exact same core competencies that I showed you earlier in defining career readiness. And for a particular language program, I took the NACE definitions that are on their website already and tweaked them ever so slightly just to think about each of these skill areas through a language learning lens. So for communication, for example, develop advanced communication skills that top every employer's list for entry-level talent, refining your writing, speaking, and audience awareness in both your first language and your language of study. So that first part of the definition is something that's already been established as the definition of this skill for a broad audience, but really trying to focus on the language-specific application of that skill. So for each of those, I introduced some kind of element where we're connecting the skill area to a language program specifically. So again, not an extremely high effort kind of activity or way of engaging in career readiness and making that connection with students, but still something that has an impact on students' perception of what they're doing in a language program and how that helps them as a future professional. Very similar application. This one was for a one-pager that a language department wanted to develop, where they wanted to highlight these skills specifically. Not all of these skills were listed as the 8 core competencies from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, but a couple of them are critical thinking, communication. This particular department wanted to focus on adaptability and cultural competence, but really making that connection in marketing to students that they would develop in these kinds of professional ways by virtue of having gone through a language program at their institution. And I'll be sure to share this as well with everyone, so you'll have access to the recording, of course, but I'm happy to send along these materials as well, just so that you have some food for thought and some examples of kind of how this could look for you all if you were interested in developing something similar. So that's kind of it for the career readiness definition piece. And I want to move into a little bit higher effort activities and ways of engaging students more directly in career readiness conversations in the classroom in particular. Okay. So for career readiness conversations in the classroom, these kinds of activities that I'll share here are meant to be implemented in a very, again, manageable way, nothing that would require a high level of effort. But again, that gets students to have a career-focused lens for understanding and thinking about the activities in a language course, and to make some direct connections between classroom and professionalization. And the reason I think this is so important, not only to help students prepare for the job market, but also we know that students are, not in their programs or in classes, in a bubble, right? They have a whole network of peers, of family, of community out there where maybe not everybody understands why they might be pursuing a particular area of study, right? And most of the students that I talk with when I ask them, hey, who here in the class has gone to Thanksgiving dinner and been asked like, oh gosh, you're majoring in Italian, like, what are you going to do with that? And students always just laugh like before they start raising their hands because they've all been there, right? And having these kinds of conversations really equips students, or getting them thinking this way even, helps prepare them for some of those peer engagements, those peer interactions, those family conversations, where they can speak with confidence about why they are majoring or minoring in a language, when they have some of that language in hand, right, to take back to folks and not justify their decisions or their academic path, but to feel confident in answering some of those broad questions and feel like they have a bit more direction, in mind. So the first way I've seen this work well in the classroom is by including career competencies in the syllabus. And I will show you an example of what this has looked like. But this serves as a framework, right, for having a conversation with students about, hey, here are the learning outcomes from this course. Here are the activities. Here are your deliverables at the end of the course. But also, by the time you successfully complete this course, you will have developed communication in this way, your technology skills in this way, and tying each of those competencies to specific activities from your course and things that are already outlined in the syllabus. And the second activity is inviting early career alumni or someone out there in industry whose early career to come speak with your students. I know a lot of programs, a lot of departments already do alumni panels. I know career centers do alumni panels and networking events. which are fabulous opportunities. But what is great about having someone who is early career, and by early career, I mean 1 to 3 years in a job, in the classroom, is that it is much more informal. Students feel a lot more comfortable speaking with the individual in question, and it really opens their eyes to the different kinds of positions and things like that that they are potentially qualified to fill. And it gives them confidence to then go to some of those larger events, like a networking event, like a career panel that's open to many majors. And to be frank, early career professionals, especially those who have majored in a language, it's a pretty small community, and folks are super, super happy to do these kinds of things and come and talk with your students kind of about what they've been up to since graduation. And so I'll share some kind of pro tips for kind of how to go about that in a really easy way. I'll show you a template that I use to send out those kinds of invitations, and just some of my pro tips for making sure that that's a smooth experience and an easy lift for you as a faculty member. So talking about the syllabus, that first kind of activity there, mentioned that including career competencies in the syllabus is one way to engage students in those career readiness type conversations. So I want to show you an example. In this example that's on the screen, I'm not going to go in detail through all the text here, but you will see it in the follow-up when I send these materials. But here the faculty member focused on technology for one of the core competencies that they wanted to highlight. Importantly, they didn't make this an exhaustive list. They only chose 5 competencies for their particular course. And what the faculty member decided to do is they decided to kind of break this down, the technology as a competency, into 3 parts, right? What does this mean in the workplace? Like, why do you need to have technology skills when you enter the workplace? So a very brief statement on, positioning the student into the future and saying, here is how you will use technologies when you enter the job market. Then the faculty member translates that to the course specifically. So in this particular course, the faculty member has, quite a few group presentations as part of, part of the syllabus and part of the activities that students would be evaluated on. But instead of just leaving it open to students to decide how they put together their presentations, she prescribed to students specific technologies that they would use in preparation. So she established that, hey, you all are going to collaborate and work together. You are going to use Google Docs to share knowledge, organize content, and align with group members on this research project. And that really mimics a work environment, right? When I work on a group project, for example, with my colleagues, we're a Microsoft organization. So we work in SharePoint, we work in Microsoft Share Docs, things like that. So she prescribed for them a specific technology to use. Same thing for the presentation materials itself. PowerPoint for presenting itself, and then Canva. This particular institution had a Canva account for creating visuals. That was one of the elements for her presentations. You needed to have compelling visuals in the presentation in addition to text. So really prescribe those technologies for students to use. And then finally, she connected once again to the job market and gestured toward how students could take their technology skills from her course and market those on the job market in a conversation with a recruiter, in a conversation with a potential employer. And again, speaking in broad terms, right? A student isn't going to sit down in an interview and say, I know how to use Google Docs, like great, right? But what do we use these tools for? We use these tools to collaborate, to create compelling, engaging, persuasive presentations and to get feedback from folks. Second area here is inviting those alumni speakers, again, in a more informal context, rather than a wider career panel that's maybe department-wide or across an institution. And I mentioned the importance of that. But one thing that I do want to add to that is that one area where I feel students need a lot of support in thinking about what an entry-level job is, language majors specifically tend to, and I don't know, maybe this could be for all majors, but I noticed that language majors often think in terms of mid-career or late career when they're sharing like what they want to do. I can't tell you how many times a student will say like, I want to be a diplomat, and like I laugh and I'm like, well, I don't laugh, but I say like, oh yeah, like maybe when you're 50. But they're thinking, that's great that they're thinking long term. However, you want them to understand what an entry-level job is and how you can incrementally work toward that dream job of a diplomat, right? If you speak to people who are in those later career positions, they've probably gone through 6 or 7 different jobs that maybe aren't super or weren't super appealing to them at the time, but weren't super glamorous, but that helped them get to where they are today. And so having early career alumni speak to your students really helps to put them in that mindset of what an actual entry-level job looks like. It kind of opens their eyes in that sense that, you know, hey, maybe a student graduates and they become an HR assistant. A language major isn't necessarily going to think that that's a job related to language majors, but that alumni can help make that connection and share with your students how they frame their language skills or their language major for that kind of position, and then talk about where they hope to go from there. But setting that kind of realistic expectation for students is really important, and your early career alumni are going to be best positioned to do that. So a couple of pro tips. I think the hardest thing for faculty are just figuring out like, where do I find someone to do this, right? I like to direct folks to LinkedIn, just because LinkedIn is a super useful tool for understanding different industries, who's hiring and what roles, et cetera. But LinkedIn has an alumni tab for different universities. And there are different search capabilities where you can type in keywords like Spanish or Italian or French, and you can filter search results by year of graduation. So it's a pretty easy way to kind of narrow down and find someone, you know, who has majored in a particular language or in a language in general. Not necessarily from your institution. It can be from any institution, but there are alumni tabs for most institutions where you can narrow things down in that way. And it is very common for professionals on LinkedIn to get cold reach outs from people saying, hey, hoping for a coffee chat, hoping for an informational interview, would love for you to come talk to my students, all types of things. So it would not be odd or ill-placed to reach out in that way. I know that career centers have different ways of contacting alumni, a lot of tools for doing so. Career centers are typically very open to supporting departments in understanding and finding different alumni. And then, of course, I'm sure you all have your own networks, know students who recently graduated, maybe who stay in touch, maybe who reach out and want you to serve as a reference, and folks that you could potentially reach out to for that purpose. Next tip here, won't go into this in too much detail, but having an invite template on hand that's really short, sweet, and to the point makes this all faster when you're reaching out to potentially multiple individuals each semester, asking them to join via Zoom. If they happen to be in town, great, but Zoom tends to work best for this kind of format. So I provided here kind of a nice email template that would work for those purposes. But just quickly sharing, you know, the course that you're teaching, inviting them to speak via Zoom, about their early career path, 30 minutes, keeping it short and sweet for them as well, providing them with some date and time options, and just leaving it at that, sharing details once they agree. But we've been pretty successful in formats and getting folks to chime in. And last one here, again, might seem kind of like an obvious recommendation, but it's definitely worth repeating, I think. When you're preparing to have that early career alum speak with your students, really, really important to share guidelines and around the focus of the conversation. I know a lot of early career individuals are super excited to talk with students and share kind of what they've been up to, this, that, and the other. But you would be surprised how quickly folks, when they enter a new role, shift from, you know, speaking in academic terms or university student terms to speaking in industry jargon. So it's really good to repeat to your alum that you're inviting to your class that you really want them to frame what their role is in broad, general terms so that everyone in the class can understand. Talk about how they landed their first full-time role. Go into detail. Did you engage with the Career Center? Did you do any networking? How many applications did you submit? It's probably a lot. And kind of talk through that process with students. But also have them touch upon the skills and the perspectives that they developed as a language major and how those skills and perspectives help them or show up in their day-to-day work. Because the purpose of this is to help students connect what they're doing to their next steps, to their professionalization. And you want to make sure that your alum isn't maybe just talking in great detail about the day-to-day of their job or what they like about their company. You really want to make sure that they're bridging that gap for students. So it's really good to kind of share those guidelines with the alum in advance to make sure that things kind of stay on track. Next area, probably the higher list area in terms of developing career readiness activities. These are all for implementation in the classroom itself, similar to that previous set of activities. So all of these activities that I'll share with you here can be developed in the target language. Some of them can be adapted for English language if, for example, it's a first semester course, or if for whatever reason you're teaching maybe a large enrollment course in which the language of instruction is English. But all of these can be developed and implemented in the target language. And again, higher lift, but the impact is a lot greater for these activities in helping students to develop their professional identities and have resume-ready outputs. Which of course we know is important for their visits to the Career Center, for understanding kind of what their next steps will be and how they'll write that resume, how they'll frame that cover letter when the time comes. So the three I want to walk through. The first is an about me elevator pitch. So we all know from first semester, second semester, third semester, pretty much all of the language courses, right? We have students introduce themselves. And this is just a little bit of a spin on that self-introduction where they're saying their name, their age. I know in a lot of courses, right, they talk about, I have 4 brothers and sisters, and they're developing their vocabulary and ways to introduce themselves in that way. Same take, but introducing vocabulary that's a little bit more career focused. So where we're having them share what their major is, what they're hoping to do after college, those types of things. So not dissimilar to the kinds of activities you're already doing in your courses, but just tweaking things a bit to have a little bit more of a career focus. The second one that I'll walk through is my favorite. It's called the skills narrative. And this is a reflection-based exercise where students are identifying a skill that they believe they possess, defining it, and talking about it or thinking about it, reflecting on it in a post-college way, like talking about how that skill will show up on the job market. I'll show you what I mean by this. We'll walk through a specific example, but it's a really powerful exercise that I've seen work well in a lot of different ways. And the last one is specific to literature courses. A couple of years ago, I had faculty say, these are great activities, we want to do X, Y, and Z, but could we develop something that's specific for a literature classroom? So the annotated insight is kind of a response to that need, where students are learning to translate some of the complex ideas, theories, concepts that they're learning about in their literature courses and translating those for non-specialist audiences. So appropriate for, upper division courses, potentially even graduate students, if that's applicable. All right, so the elevator pitch. Elevator pitches happen in many different environments, so always relevant for students, doesn't matter the discipline. But for language students specifically, what this looks like is a career-focused introduction, again, in the target language ideally, where students can speak to their academic backgrounds, their professional strengths, work experience if they have any, and career aspirations if we're at that level where we're using the future tense and those kinds of things. Again, ideal for lower division courses, depending on the kind of vocabulary that they have or what kind of additional vocabulary needs to be introduced. Why this matters, I touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago. It encourages career reflection, right, through language use. So a lot of the things that students are already doing in the course, but getting them just to shift their mindset a bit and understand the application of language learning in different environments, specifically a career-oriented one. Helps to develop their real-world communication skills, right? If your students are planning to work abroad, work in an international context, the value of this activity should be evident for that, right? You want students to develop elevator pitches for a professional audience if they're planning on interviewing, for a company or an organization abroad. And then again, just across the board, great activity for preparing for networking events, internship, interview preparation, and employment interview preparation as well. For implementing this kind of activity, the vocabulary is probably the biggest, gap. If you're working with a particular textbook, this kind of vocabulary isn't often introduced. I know some textbooks nowadays are, gearing things more toward, career-oriented vocabulary, professionalization, that kind of thing. But usually vocabulary needs to be introduced to run the activity successfully. Guiding students in writing their pitches, always good to get feedback so that other students can see and kind of build off of each other and understand, like, oh, John over here is thinking about using his Spanish major and his skills in Spanish for entering the healthcare industry, where we know these language skills are really in demand. So kind of get some of that peer-to-peer ideation flowing. And then having students actually perform the pitch as if they were on the job market, but also in a more informal context, if that's the preference. Won't go through this in detail, just in the interest of time, but I have 2 examples here, for you to look at another time, where I've translated these into English, but these are 2 students that wrote out their elevator pitches, where again, they're introducing their name, they're sharing what they're studying, a few adjectives that would describe themselves in a professional way. The example on the left, the student shares that he is organized, likes working in teams, shares a bit about his experience in work. So rather than saying that he worked at, a cash register at a grocery store, I worked in customer service. So looking up some of those industry-specific terms to talk about some of his past experiences. This student who was in a 3rd semester course, so had a future tense, was able to share where he would like to work, where he planned on working, international marketing, share that he was learning a 3rd language to better communicate with customers in other countries. So already making those connections between what he's doing in the language course and how that is beneficial or valuable to him and a potential employer. And so again, all these examples here are coming from actual students, but you can see kind of how it shifts their mindset a bit from, hey, I have certain learning outcomes to hit here, I have certain vocabulary items to memorize, tenses to learn, and really thinking about the professional why behind what they're doing in the classroom. So the skills narrative is the next one that I wanna touch on here. So the skills narrative equips students to speak to their skills in ways that resonate with professional audiences. Students, again, I mentioned at the very beginning, when I survey students, ask them where the biggest gap is for them, they reliably say it is in talking to people about what skills I have. So what skills do I have besides being at a certain proficiency in this language? So we've talked about the 8 core competencies. This can, of course, be expanded to talk about things like work ethic, curiosity, all kinds of different transferable skills or human skills that you feel are being developed in your course or that students are coming up with on their own. So what the skills narrative helps with, again, it helps bridge that gap between awareness around skills that students have and the ability to articulate and market them in a professional context, and helping students to have ready-made job market materials after graduation. So very practical. What this looks like in practice. So in practice, a skills narrative is identifying the skill. So the student should ideally be doing this, identifying a skill that they have, defining that skill in their own terms, and then identifying an experience, whether that's in the classroom, from study abroad, or even from a work or internship experience, and telling a story about it, story where they're applying, demonstrating where the skill was developed, or demonstrating how that skill was put into practice. So I'll give you an example here. Interpersonal communication. A student has identified this as a skill that they've developed, and they simply define it in their own words. That's really the first 2 steps. Pretty much as simple as that. So the student says being able to listen to others' ideas and understand their points of view, and being able to communicate effectively and proactively to resolve conflict. I might define it a little bit differently. You might define it a little bit differently, but the student is trying to kind of understand what that means. Because a lot of these transferable skills are not easy to define, right? We think communication, that's a pretty broad skill, and most people say that they're good communicators, but what does that actually mean? So getting students to define the skill in their own words is a really important step. And then an example for empathy, the student actually took it a step further and shared that experience and story about empathy. So the student shared that learning to read Italian literature, for example, has allowed me to gain a deeper understanding of the worldviews of writers and readers from different time periods and backgrounds. Empathy is important in a work environment because it leads to an appreciation of others. So the student is thinking about where and how they developed empathy, which we know reading does to develop empathy, especially in another language, and talks about that in a professional context. These are, of course, short examples, but if students can tell more robust stories, study abroad experiences tend to be a good catalyst for the experience story part, especially in talking about things like adaptability. But the idea here being that not only should students understand what the skill means, but how do we talk to employers, or how do we tell a story about the skills we have? I have not used this framework personally, but I have had feedback from other faculty that they wanted a framework that was a bit more robust for guiding students in better storytelling, and that the SOAR framework has been helpful for them in guiding students in crafting better stories about their skills. So in this example, you would be describing a situation, where the skill was called upon or where you needed to demonstrate it, what obstacle was overcome, by virtue of demonstrating or needing to use that skill, what actions a person took, and kind of what the results were, what the outcome was from that particular situation. So very, very valuable activity. So in the interest of time, I will probably have to make the executive decision here to skip over our annotated insights. This is a very valuable activity, and I just do want to share here just on the screen that I do share kind of the importance of this activity, how to implement it, and I give an example. So after the session, after I've shared these materials, please take the time to look through it. If you are teaching a literature course and you feel like you could use this, and I will open myself, in my inbox up to conversations and questions. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have some specific questions about what this looks like. I will just say though that I've seen this in action. A faculty member invited me via Zoom to see this activity implemented in her classroom, and it was so much fun. The students enjoyed it. They were speaking informally about the value of learning particular theoretical concepts, literary concepts to a non-specialist audience. And it was a really, really valuable activity for their professionalization. So definitely recommend if you're teaching a literature course to take a look at that and think about implementing that activity in your classroom. So I don't want to take too much time away here. I want to have a couple of minutes here to talk about events and services and promoting the Career Center and all of the resources that are available. I did meet with Peyton, what was it, Peyton? A couple of months ago, I feel, where we talked through all of the different resources and tools that are available at SMU. I was super, super impressed by all of the different ways that SMU is supporting students and all of the resources that are available at their fingertips. So if I say anything about this, it's that, don't be shy about being that bridge between career readiness in the classroom and the Career Center. The Career Center staff, they are the experts in helping students to prepare for their careers. Though it is important for students to be equipped and feel confident about what skills they're developing in your classroom, to then go to the Career Center and start exploring different career paths and leveraging those tools that are available to take that foundational work and take the next step in actually preparing to enter the job market. So I have a couple of minutes left. Hopefully folks have 1 or 2 minutes after we actually hit the 3:30 mark just to stay and chat for a bit. But Peyton, would you mind sharing a few words on the different services and tools that I have here highlighted on the screen?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And thank you, Ashley, for being here. So 1220 is our primary platform. That is where students can book appointments with us, see job and internships, all of the events that we do. Everything is going to be on 1220. Within 1220, you can find the link to InnerStride. This offers the opportunity for students to find employment abroad. So if they're wanting to work in a different country, it offers visa insights to figure out what it looks like to work in those countries, and also a job board and some help with culturally what it looks like to work in different countries. Recently, they have started a webinar series. So they have one over being employed in Australia, Canada, the UK, and I think they're going to continue to add to that. So those can be some great resources for students. And then we also have Advise. And within Advise, these are recorded informational interviews. So you can look at alumni who have graduated with a degree in world languages and see what they do now. And in these videos, they talk about how their skills that they gained in college help them get to where they are. And so hopefully that can give our students some language. If there's anything else that you need that you don't see, you're always welcome to reach out to me or anyone here at the Career Center.